Imagine waking up not in a warm bed, not even on a cold floor, but shackled to rotting straw. Wrists rubbed raw from iron cuffs that don't budge even when you twist just right. It's not a prison, not officially. It's not a hospital either, though they call it that. It's a place that exists somewhere in the middle, a space built not to heal, but to forget. This is the world of a 14th century lunatic asylum, patient not, the kind of world you read about in textbooks, not the sanitized, academic version, but the lived, breathing, decaying reality where madness wasn't treated, was punished. The moment the sun rises behind the slate-grey clouds, it brings no warmth, only the return of visibility, the threat of being seen again, of being noticed by guards who think pain is a form of discipline. There's no greeting, no good morning, only the sound of someone else screaming down the corridor, a shriek that might be from hunger, might be from fear, or might be from something so deep and broken that language stopped working long ago. Welcome to your first hour in the medieval asylum. You've been labeled mad, but you don't remember what act sealed your fate. Maybe you cried too long after your child died. Maybe you wandered the woods barefoot. Maybe your hands shook when the bishop passed, or your grief looked too much like rage. Whatever it was, it didn't take much. In a world where medicine didn't understand, the brain and theology ruled all logic. Madness wasn't a symptom, it was a sin, a stain, a threat to social order. And threats had to be contained. That's why you're here. You don't know if it's day 6 or day 60. Time isn't kept in hours, but in bruises, in how often the bucket is emptied, in how many times your name is called without kindness. And this place, it's not built to help you remember who you are, it's designed to make you forget. Forget your name, your village, your family, your worth. So let's not ask what treatment looks like here. Let's ask a different question. What does survival look like? What does it mean to keep breathing in a place where every breath is a protest against disappearance? You learn fast. You learn when to scream and when not to. You learn the guard's footsteps, the safe corners, the tiny places in your own mind, where you can hide and pretend you're still someone else. You learn to recognize the shiver in someone's shoulder before they collapse. You learn the hierarchy not of healing, but of hazard. Who bites, who sobs, who's given extra food, who's already gone, even if their body still rocks back and forth in the dark. And perhaps the cruelest part of it all is the architecture. This place wasn't built for care. It was built for control. Thick stone walls that echo sound, but never warmth. Iron bars not to keep you from escaping, because where would you go, but to keep society from seeing what they did to you, to keep the respectable world separate from the haunted one. But if you listen closely through the cold, through the damp, through the sounds of someone muttering prayers into the straw, you'll hear something else, a heartbeat, not just yours, but the echo of 1,000 others who were locked away, not because they were broken, but because they were too complex, too grieving, too inconvenient to understand. This isn't madness, this is memory. This is what we did with the people who felt too much, who hurt too deeply, who didn't fit inside the narrow rules of what it meant to be normal. And if that feels distant, if it feels like a grotesque relic of the past, remember this: every system that cannot handle difference will always find a box to put it in. In 1347, that box was an asylum. In 2025, it might look cleaner, sound softer, but if we're not careful, it echoes the same refrain. Silence the inconvenient, forget the uncomfortable, and label what you don't want to deal with as unwell. If waking up was the first shock, what comes next is worse, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it's the same. Every day in the medieval asylum is an echo of the one before it, each hour stitched together with routine cruelty so consistent, it starts to feel like law. There's no bell to start the morning, only the sound of someone getting hit. That's how you know it's time to stand up. You are lucky enough to have slept, but sleep doesn't mean peace here. Sleep is where the rats crawl, where nightmares are louder than reality, and where the cold doesn't fade but sharpens. A guard enters. You pretend not to notice, but the shuffle of his feet across the stones tells you who it is. This one is cruel but methodical. That's better than the others. He kicks the bucket of urine beside your bed. It splashes onto the straw. He doesn't care. Hygiene isn't a concern. Hair filth is part of the treatment. If you stink enough, if you're humiliated enough, maybe the madness will leave. That's the logic. It's not scientific, of course. But in 1347, science bows to superstition. Medicine and theology dance together in a room full of knives. The idea isn't to understand you, it's to discipline you. Because your presence is an offense, your mind a threat, and your recovery isn't the goal, it's obedience. You're given clothes, if they can be called that. A rough, once white shift, crusted with blood and something worse. It's not yours. Nothing is. Even your body doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore. You've been poked, shaved, bled, shackled. The line between the inside of your skin and the outside world is thin now. Too thin. Someone screams again, not from pain this time, but from joy. Or maybe they're remembering something. A birthday, a song, the way butter used to taste. That's the tragedy here, not just the suffering, but the flickers of humanity that keep breaking through the horror. Because these people, they're not monsters, they're not mad, they're not statistics. They're human beings who were inconvenient, misunderstood, or simply unlucky. That woman in the corner, she's a midwife who lost too many babies. That man near the wall, he wouldn't stop mourning his wife. The boy in the cell beside you, his parents couldn't explain why he talked to birds and not to them. Madness, in the medieval sense, isn't about delusion, it's about deviation. And every deviant gets the same answer. Lock them away. The doctors, if they come at all, don't ask questions. They bleed you. They slice into your scalp. They whisper prayers as they hurt you and call it mercy. They believe the body must be broken for the soul to be saved. You don't argue. You can't. Speaking out makes you more suspicious. Silence is the only defense left, and even that isn't foolproof. You're herded with the others into a stone chamber. Light filters in through a tiny slit near the ceiling. The floor is wet, always. Someone coughs blood. Someone else hums. A woman scratches symbols into the wall sigils. She calls them protection spells. You start to memorize them. Not because you believe, but because belief, in this place, is one of the only things that still belongs to you. And that's what survival becomes here. A patchwork of borrowed rituals, tiny comforts, invisible boundaries. A word you repeat to yourself. A piece of straw shaped like a cross. The rhythm of someone else's breathing that reminds you you're not alone. You begin to mark the passage of time in strange ways, not by sun or bell, but by screams, by meals skipped, by which hallucination visited you last. And still, deep down, you carry the hope that this is temporary, that someone will come, that someone will say your name with kindness, but no one comes. No one ever comes, because once you're here, you're no longer a person, you're a problem. And problems, in 1347, are meant to be locked away and forgotten. If you thought food would offer relief, you're wrong. Hunger is not a passing discomfort, here it's a constant, like the cold, like the stink. It gnaws at you in the background of every scream, every prayer, every breath. You start the day empty and go to sleep emptier. Meals are not moments of nourishment, they're reminders of your position in the world. You are at the bottom, beneath mercy, beneath dignity. What passes for breakfast is a handful of mold-spotted bread, sometimes congealed stew scraped from the same pot used yesterday, or maybe 3 days ago, it's hard to tell. A bit of dried meat, if you're lucky, but luck rarely favors the confined. There are no spoons, no bowls if you can't hold your own. The food is dumped directly onto the stone floor or into rough wooden troughs, the kind used to feed animals. No one talks during meals. They grunt, snatch, growl. You learn fast, eat quickly, defend your scraps, never make eye contact. There are no seconds, only consequences. Starvation here is not a symptom, it's a treatment. The less you eat, the weaker you are. And the weaker you are, the less trouble you make. You've seen it before. The girl who wouldn't stop crying after a guard hit her. She didn't eat. For days, when she finally collapsed, they called it divine punishment. When the boy who used to chant hymns refused the rancid meat, they tied him to the wall, left him there to reconsider his sin. You eat, not because it helps, but because it's your only act of resistance. Every bite is a protest. I am still here. I still want to live. Water is worse. No one boils it. No one filters it. If it's brown, it's brown. If it's freezing, it freezes your teeth. If it smells like rot, you drink and pretend it doesn't, because your choices are simple: thirst or filth, and filth wins. Every time. Sometimes you get sick. Sometimes you hallucinate. You see faces in the flickering shadows, whispering secrets. You'd scream, but what's the point? No one listens. Or worse, they do, and then you're punished for making noise. Food is never nourishment. It's surveillance. The guards watch. How you eat, how fast, how much. They judge your mental state by how well you chew. Don't chew at all. You're dangerous. Eat too quickly. You're deranged. Refuse the food. You're rebellious. It's a game where every move is wrong, and the punishment is always the same. Beatings, restraint, or the cold corner where no one ever comes back quite right. You learn to trade scraps of bread for silence, meat for an hour of peace, moldy apples for someone else's tears. But trade is dangerous. The guards hate barter. They want you dependent. They want you desperate. One night, you see someone. Sneak a crust to the boy with the limp. A guard notices. The next morning, the boy's bed is empty, and so is the other's. You don't ask questions. You never ask questions. Hunger is not the worst part. The worst part is remembering what food used to mean. Warmth, laughter, the clink of plates, your mother humming. The memory is sharper than any starvation, because here every meal is a weapon, and every bite a reminder that you are only fed to keep you alive long enough to suffer. By midday, the air thickens not with warmth or kindness, but with the stench of sweat, waste, and labor. This is the part of the day they call therapy, but don't let the word fool you. Therapy, here, is not about healing. It's about using the unwell to build walls, to scrub floors, to reinforce the very system that broke them. You are not a patient. You are a resource. and your body, however bent or bruised, is expected to produce. You're handed a brush, a bucket, a rope, or worse, you're ordered to carry stones twice your size, to haul water you're not allowed to drink, to scrape shit from the corners of a cell that reeks of centuries of suffering. If you collapse, they hit you. If you refuse, they punish. If you break down weeping, they laugh. You were committed because your mind was unstable, and yet here you were expected to operate like a beast of burden. There is no logic, just control. Some of the work is dangerous. You've seen people fall from ladders with no one stopping to check if they still breathe. You've watched a girl pass out from heat, her skin red and blistered, only to be dragged by the hair back to her task, and still the work continues. Because in the eyes of the asylum keepers, your suffering is progress. They believe if you sweat enough, if you toil enough, if your hands crack open and bleed enough, something in your mind will shift back into place. But healing doesn't come through wounds, not these wounds. What makes it worse is that some of the work is skilled. Those who once had trades, cobblers, weavers, carpenters, are quickly found and exploited. Their talents are no longer theirs. They're confiscated, turned into profit for the asylum's keepers. You fix shoes for guards who spit on you. You embroider robes for priests who never look you in the eye. You build the scaffolding that hangs your friends. And through it all, you keep your head down, because dignity here is a crime. They don't want your spirit, they want your silence. But sometimes, in the cracks between cruelty, something human remains. You hear a woman hum a lullaby as she sews, her fingers moving with precision muscle memory. You see a boy carve a little animal from discarded wood, placing it under his straw bed like a secret. These are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of remembrance. They are how you hold on to the self the asylum wants to erase. And sometimes rarely a guard looks away long enough for you to breathe, to stretch your fingers, to whisper to the person beside you, I remember who I was. You tell them your real name, not the one they call you here. You remind them you once had a home, and in that tiny act there's resistance. But the moment doesn't last. The taskmaster returns, the chain tightens, and the sun moves overhead, indifferent to the lives bowed beneath its light. As afternoon wanes, the most dreaded part of the day arrives treatment. In the modern world, that word might conjure images of care, of concern, of calibrated medicine administered by trained hands. But in 1347, inside these stone asylum walls, treatment is nothing more than torment in ritualized form. The doctors, or what passed for doctors, arrive not with stethoscopes or remedies, but with blades, with irons, with buckets of ice water and rusted hooks. They come robed in symbols of faith, muttering Latin as though prayer alone can justify pain. Their tools are sharpened, not to heal, but to open flesh. The belief is simple and horrifying. The madness must be bled out. If your mind is broken, perhaps your blood is cursed. And so they cut, shallow at first, then deeper if you don't scream loud enough. Bloodletting isn't a last resort. Here it's the opening act. You sit shackled to a wooden bench while they slice open your arm, your back, your scalp. If you flinch, you're accused of resisting God's grace. If you pass out, they say the devil is fleeing. There's no winning, only surviving. Others are burned literally. Hot irons are pressed to the soles of their feet, the backs of their necks, their ribs, the logic. Pain will shock the madness out, like a reset switch made of fire. One man was told the devil sat in his spine, so they branded him along the vertebrae. He hasn't walked since. No one questions the outcome. No one questions the method. Because here, suffering is sanctified, and if you die during treatment, the priests call it deliverance. If you survive, they call it proof. The worst of it comes with the silence. These doctors don't ask questions. They don't take notes. They don't care what caused your breakdown or what might bring you peace. You are not a mystery to be understood. You are a threat to be subdued. There's also a grotesque hierarchy. At play, those who are poor get the knife. The wealthy, those who could no longer be cared for at home, sometimes get herbs or oils. But even that is rare, because mental anguish in this era is not seen as trauma or imbalance. It's sin, it's possession, it's punishment, and punishment by its nature must hurt. The guards enjoy these sessions. They stand in the back, smirking, betting on who screams first. You hear laughter as a young girl is dunked headfirst into ice water, over and over until her lips turn blue. The doctor calls it hydrotherapy. You call it drowning. And even if you beg, plead, promise to change, they don't hear you. Not because you're lying, but because they don't care. Because in this place, pain is the only language anyone respects. After the sessions, you're left in your cell, wounds still open, skin still smoking. There are no bandages, no ointments, no comfort, just the cold, the dark, and the slow realization that if this is healing, death might be the only cure. As dusk begins to descend, you might expect things to slow down, to soften. But twilight in a medieval asylum brings no peace. It brings only a shift from punishment to performance. Because now, the doors creak open not for healing, not for prayer, but for spectacle. The asylum doesn't just hide. The unwanted exhibits them. Word spreads through the town. The guards unlock the side gates. And for a small fee, local citizens, nobles, peasants, children are allowed inside to witness the broken. They call it a tour. You call it a cage. You are displayed like an animal, or worse, like entertainment. The visitors gawk, point, whisper. Some laugh, others recoil. They ask questions, the guards answer proudly, as if reciting museum facts. This one ate dirt for weeks. That one tried to marry the sun. She sings to shadows. They don't ask why. They don't ask what happened. They just want to show. Sometimes they get more than they bargained for. Patience, pushed past the edge, scream or strip or cry out for mothers long gone. And the crowd gasps not in horror but delight. The guards feed off it. They prod the silent ones, coaxing them to dance, to sing, to confess. If you refuse, you're whipped later. If you obey, they might throw you a scrap of meat. Not because they care, but because trained behavior pleases the audience. It's a brutal transaction, dignity traded for survival. The worst are the staged fights. Two patients forced into the center of the hall, told to hit each other. Sometimes there's a reward, sometimes not. Always there's blood. And if one refuses to fight, the guards jump in and make it a three-way punishment. You learn quickly. Being passive is dangerous, but being interesting is worse. If you cry too beautifully, if you scream too poetically, you become a favorite. And favorites are expected to perform every night, like clockwork. One woman in your ward used to be a singer. Now she hums lullabies to a wall, and the guests demand it on cue. She sings through cracked lips, blood on her teeth, while children clap, then they leave. They always leave. No one stays. No one asks, "Are you all right?" They walk past the chained, the feverish, the forgotten, as if strolling through a cursed gallery. And once the gates close, the silence returns, but not relief. Because what was taken from you under the guise of care is now sold as theatre. This isn't just cruelty. It's commodified madness, suffering packaged and priced. And it works. The asylum receives donations, praise, even religious approval, because it reinforces the story people want to believe, that those inside are not like them, that you're different, broken, lost, unsavable, but you know the truth. The line between visitor and inmate is paper thin. One bad year, one dead child, one breakdown, and anyone could end up on the other side of the bars, asked to dance for their supper. As the final traces of sunlight disappear behind the cold stone walls, night does not descend gently. It crashes in loud, chaotic, merciless. In the medieval asylum, the dark hours are the most dangerous, not because of some mythic fear of ghosts or demons, but because the guards stop watching. Or worse, they start watching for sport. You'd think the absence of light might quiet the place, but it's the opposite. Screams rise, fists pound against wooden doors, chains rattle as patients thrash in their restraints or plead into the void. Some sob, others chant, repeating the only prayers they still remember. A few simply sit still, eyes wide, as if bracing for impact, and they're right to brace, because when the sun goes down, the thin veil of order dissolves entirely. There are no patrols, no doctors, just a few half-drunk guards laughing by the hearth while the halls erupt into primal noise. You can't sleep. No one can. Not really. You can doze, but only with your back to the wall, one eye open, one hand clutching the corner of your tattered blanket, not for warmth, but to feel something, anything, you can still control. The cold grows sharper at night. The stone floor leaches heat from your body. Your breath fogs in front of your face, and your fingers go numb before you realize they've stiffened. You try to pull the straw closer to your body, but the rats have already claimed it. And then there's the violence. Not from the guards, though they're always a threat, but from the other patients. Not because they're monsters, but because they've been turned into animals. Deprived of sleep, food, medicine, and kindness, they lash out not with malice, but with instinct. You learn who to stay near and who to stay away from. The man who rocks back and forth all day, humming, becomes a howling terror at night. The girl who sleeps in the corner, she wakes up screaming about flames. One patient believes he's still a knight and challenges the shadows to duels until he passes out. And sometimes this is the most terrifying part. Sometimes they break free. Someone wriggles out of their chains. Someone shatters a bone trying to climb the wall. And suddenly you're not safe in your corner anymore. You hear footsteps, or worse, whispers. They don't make sense. The wolf is inside. I dug through my eyes. He's under the floor. You clutch your knees and pray that the voices pass you by. And if you cry, cry silently, because tears attract attention, and attention is a death sentence after dark. There's no light except for the occasional flicker from the corridor torch, and even that goes out sometimes. Then you're blind, alone, disembodied, just breath and fear. This is when most people break, not during the beatings, not during the bleeding, but in the quiet between screams, when your thoughts become indistinguishable from hallucinations, when the memories of your old life grow soft, fuzzy, like a half-forgotten dream. You used to have a name, a family, a reason. Now you have only two goals: don't be heard and don't be touched. That's what survival means after sunset. It means outlasting the night, and praying, if you still remember how, that the dawn comes before the worst part of you slips away forever. When morning finally comes, it doesn't arrive with mercy. It drags itself across the stones like an exhausted ghost. There are no chirping birds here, no warm rays of sunlight through a window. Just the clank of a pail, the groan of a door, the moan of someone who made it through the night barely. You feel it before you see it. The cold has settled deeper into your bones. Your joints crack as you move, if you dare to move. And then you notice it, the silence, the wrong kind. Someone is missing. Maybe it's the woman who hummed lullabies. Maybe the boy who whispered to rats. Maybe the man who stopped eating. Death in the asylum isn't rare, it's routine. There are no announcements, no processions, no eulogies. A guard comes in, drags the body out by the feet, and the cell is hosed down if you're lucky. Most of the time, it's just left to dry, like spilled soup, and no one speaks of it. Not because they don't care, but because they do. Because speaking means remembering, and remembering means pain. And pain gets you labeled unstable. Again, still, always. The corpse is not buried, not properly. It's discarded, sometimes burned in the fire pits, sometimes dumped into a trench. Behind the asylum, if the body is intact enough, it might be sold for dissection to some traveling doctor. They call it science. You call it desecration. If there's a family, they're rarely notified. In truth, most families never ask. Admitting your son or sister or mother died in an asylum would stain the bloodline. It would mean madness might run in your veins. Better to pretend they died years ago. Better to forget. And so the dead are not mourned. They are recycled. Their straw reused. Their shift handed to someone new. Their cell filled before the echoes of their screams have even faded. It's not personal, it's policy. There are whispers among the longer-term inmate stories of people who were never sick to begin with. A woman thrown in because her husband wanted her inheritance. A man who spoke against the Lord's taxes. A child who wouldn't stop asking questions. Here, madness isn't just a medical condition. It's a political convenience. The dead are more useful, quiet than loud. And the system ensures they stay that way. But you're still here. And that's a problem. Because surviving day after day makes you dangerous. It means you've built defenses, rituals, habits, mental armor. It means you've adapted. And systems like this don't like adaptation. They like surrender. So they watch you closely. Are you smiling too much? Are you standing too straight? Do your eyes look too focused? All red flags, because hope is viewed as rebellion. And rebellion must be crushed. So you shrink, you stumble, you murmur, you make yourself small, you play the role. Not because you've lost who you are, but because survival demands it. Because in this world, the moment they think you're improving, the torment changes. It escalates, it celebrates, so you wait. You grieve in silence. You remember the dead not with words, but with small acts of defiance. You whisper their names. You protect their drawings on the wall. You hum their tune when the guards aren't listening. And somehow, against all odds, in this cathedral of cruelty, memory becomes resistance. Mourning becomes protest. And you remain. There's a moment in every day when the weight of the asylum presses down hard as not during treatment. Not during the night terrors, but during the moments in between. The terrible stillness where you are alone with your thoughts. It might be an hour, It might be 5 minutes, but it comes. When no one is screaming, when the guards are bored, when no one's watching, and it's in that silence that you face the most dangerous question of all. What if they're right about me? Because doubt is a quiet infection. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps into your bones through the cracks of exhaustion and fear. You start to wonder, maybe I am broken. Maybe I don't deserve to leave. Maybe this is who I've always been. It's not madness that breaks you, it's the gaslight of the institution. You can survive beatings, cold, hunger, but when the world convinces you that your pain is proof of your failure, that's the real violence. You remember things differently now, not as memories, but as dreams. Did you really have a brother who used to sneak you sweetbread? Was there really a meadow near your village with yellow flowers? Or was that something you made up to cope? You can't be sure anymore. The asylum scrubs your identity like it scrubs its floors with brine and fire and a blind indifference to what gets lost in the process. You've seen it happen to others. The woman who no longer speaks, the man who used to recite poems, now mumbling syllables that don't form words. Not madness, erasure, slow, intentional, effective, and still they call it healing. But healing without agency isn't recovery, it's conversion. They don't want you well, they want you changed, made into something easier to manage, quieter, blank. And yet, in those moments of stillness, something else stirs too. Not madness, not despair, but memory. You remember a smell fresh bread, a sound laughter, a name your own, spoken kindly. And that's when you know you are not what they say you are. You never were. The madness here isn't in the patience, it's in the system, in the idea that conformity is health, that silence is peace, that pain is purification. And once you recognize that, once you say it even silently, you become powerful, not free, not safe, but dangerous. Because the worst thing you can do in a place like this is believe you still matter, and you do. So you start to reclaim little things. You sit up straighter. You whisper your name in the dark. You protect the small corner of your straw-like. It's sacred ground. You hum songs you haven't heard in years. And you start to look at the others, not with fear, but with recognition. Because if you can see their humanity, maybe they can see yours too. It's not hope, exactly. Hope would be foolish here, but it's something else. Something older, harder. A refusal, a vow, I will not disappear. As the second full day closes in, the ritual begins again, but this time you see it differently. It's not just the repetition of cruelty that unsettles you now. It's the machinery of it, the precision, the choreography of oppression. Everyone plays their part. The guards pretend they're keeping order. The doctors pretend they're applying science. The priests pretend they're offering salvation. And the patients, those who still understand the script, pretend they're being helped. It's a theater, a grotesque play with no audience but itself. But once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You notice how the same girl is always chosen for music hour, how the same man is always denied food the day after he cries. You notice that when someone starts to improve eating more, sleeping better, they're given less, as if the system punishes recovery. Because recovery means change, and change is the enemy of institutions built on predictability. You realize now they don't want to cure anyone. That would collapse the premise of the asylum. Because if someone can be healed, then the whole place must answer for why it doesn't. No, what they want is obedience, consistency, a living museum of failure to remind the outside world to stay in line. Madness isn't what brought you here. Inconvenience did. Your breakdown was the excuse, not the reason. And suddenly, you remember all the others who were labeled mad. The woman who refused marriage, the boy who cried after battle, the healer who used herbs instead of prayer, the dreamers, the broken-hearted, the grieving, the brave, all silenced with one word: insane. That word became a weapon, a sentence, a grave. But now that you've seen the system, you begin to plan not escape, not yet, but resistance, real resistance, the kind that doesn't start with fire or fists, but with memory. With questions, you ask the girl beside you her name, her real name. She says it slowly, as if tasting it for the first time in months. You tell her yours. You repeat it to each other, again, until it sticks. And the next morning, you carve it into the wall. Tiny, hidden, but there. And when someone new arrives, eyes wild, trembling, last you meet them with a nod, with the gentlest whisper, "You're not alone." And suddenly, this place becomes something else. Not safe, not good, but cracked. And through the cracks, light begins to leak. A song hummed at night, a shared crust of bread, a drawing passed hand to hand until it lands with someone who remembers how to smile. The guards notice. They grow crueler. But you are no longer helpless. You are tethered to others, to memory, to self. And that tether is everything. It's not freedom, not yet. But it's the seed of something greater. The knowledge that you are not what they made you, that you never were, and that even in the darkest corner of the world, humanity can endure not because of strength, but because of stubborn, sacred defiance. Now, imagine stepping outside the asylum, not physically, but in thought. Imagine what it looks like to the world beyond these walls. To the villagers in their markets, the nobles in their halls, the priests in their pulpits. The asylum is a comfort to them, not because it heals, but because it hides. It tucks away the inconvenient, the traumatized, the different, the loud. It is, for them, a symbol of order. But that order is built on a lie. The lie that madness is a disease of individuals, not a symptom of the world itself. Because what they never tell you is this: the asylum doesn't just hold the insane. It holds the sensitive, the observant, the ones who saw too much, who felt too deeply, who asked questions that made others uncomfortable. You remember now how quickly the world turned its back, not just when you fell, but when you began to speak, when you named your pain, when you cried too loudly, when your grief disrupted their dinner parties. And that's when they stopped calling you neighbor, friend, daughter, son. That's when they began calling you mad. The label isn't a diagnosis, it's a muzzle. It keeps people from listening to you. Because if you're crazy, then your sorrow is irrelevant. Your rage is meaningless. Your story can be dismissed before it's even told. And that dismissal that silences what the asylum is built to enforce. But you're not silent anymore. Not inside. That seed of defiance has taken root, and it's growing. Slowly, quietly. It grows every time someone says their real name. Every time someone sings. Every time you help another survive the night. It grows every time you remember who you were before they told you who you had to be, and it changes you. You start to walk differently, not boldly but deliberately. You make eye contact, briefly, with those who are still capable of seeing, and some begin to see back. That's the beginning of revolution in a place like this. Not fire, not escape, but connection. You realize you've built a language of survival that the guards don't understand. A code of gestures, glances, silence used not as retreat, but as rebellion. And now you are not alone. You are part of something, a network of the unseen, the misnamed, the unbroken. The world outside still thinks the asylum is necessary, still believes it keeps them safe. But one day, someone will tell the truth about what happened inside, about what was done in the name of medicine, of religion, of order. And when that day comes, it will not be the voices of the doctors or the priests that echo, it will be yours, cracked, trembling, resilient, because the truth has never been fragile, only buried, and in every buried thing there is a heartbeat, waiting. The last hours of your second day feel different, not easier, not kinder, but clearer. You've survived the pain, the cold, the spectacle, the silence. You've bled and mourned and whispered your name into stone. And now, in this final stretch before night claims the halls again, you feel something unexpected rising in your chest. It isn't hope, not exactly. It's something older, more primal, knowing, a knowing that you are still here, that they failed to erase you, that you exist beyond their definitions. And that's the most terrifying truth you carry. The institution cannot understand endurance without obedience, but you've obeyed nothing but your will to remain intact, and that is power. You begin to see the others differently too, not just as victims, but as witnesses. Every person here holds a piece of truth no priest, doctor, or noble could ever fabricate. A truth written in scars, in lullabies hummed under breath, in the quiet defiance of breath drawn one more time. Even the most silent patient carries a story more honest than the church's hymns. And that collective memory, twisted, scarred, but unextinguished, is the institution's greatest threat. Because if enough of you remember, if enough of you connect those fragments, then the lie collapses, and something new can be born. Not justice, perhaps not yet, but record, a telling, a trail. You imagine a world where someone outside finally listens, where the myths of madness are peeled back and the truth revealed, that this place was never about healing, only hiding, that the real madness lived not in these cells, but in the society that built them. You picture someone years from now reading your name carved into stone, finding the scraps of your drawings, your coded songs, and for a moment the ache lessens. Because even if you never leave, your story might. It might slip through the cracks in the wall and catch a breeze. It might reach someone who needs to know that the broken were never broken at all, just buried, silenced, chained for being too human in a world afraid of humanity. And so you begin the ritual again, not because you've been defeated, but because you've begun to choose how you move through this space. The cold is still there, the hunger too, the violence, always waiting. But now, so is your will. The third morning will come, the fourth, maybe even the 10th, and they will not know what to do with you, because they cannot punish what does not break, and they cannot bury what refuses to stay dead. This is not a story of madness, it is a story of survival. A story of 1,000 small revolutions whispered in the dark by people who were never maddeningly misunderstood, only inconvenient, only ahead of their time. This wasn't just a visit to the past. It was a confrontation with a truth we often hide about how societies treat those they don't understand, can't fix, or choose not to see. We dress the asylum in robes of medicine and crosses of faith, but at its heart it was a cage built on fear. Not fear of madness, but fear of vulnerability, of grief, of truth, because every person locked away behind those stone walls threatened the illusion of control. Their existence asked questions no system wanted to answer. What if pain is not a problem to be punished? What if suffering deserves witness, not silence? What if those we lock away are not broken, but honest? The medieval asylum didn't collapse because it was defeated, collapsed because we pretended we'd moved beyond it. But echoes of it still remain. In how we pathologize difference, in how we reward silence over truth, in how we expect healing without listening. And that is the lesson. That in every age, the first step toward cruelty is the moment we decide someone's story is no longer worth hearing. So the challenge is this: listen. Listen to the forgotten, to the inconvenient, to those who speak in ways that don't fit the script. Because the measure of a society isn't how it treats the powerful, it's how it remembers the broken. And if you ever wonder whether that memory matters, just look to the walls of the old asylums. You'll find names carved there, songs hummed through pain, stories that refused to die. And in those small, stubborn echoes, buried in straw and stone, you'll hear the most human sound of all: resistance.